Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a fascinating and honestly pretty provocative thesis presented by a source called Promethean Overviews. The source material makes a really bold claim. It argues that right now, driven by this warlike urgency and a massive push for nuclear energy, a sweeping American reindustrialization effort is actively underway. So what we're going to do is strictly and impartially break down the claims, the data, and the rather unexpected philosophical arguments this source uses to build its case. So here's how we're going to break this all down today. First up, the reindustrialization vision. Second, America's second atomic age. Third, reclaiming the physical world. Fourth, science's new golden age. And finally, number 5, something they call the philosophy of potency. Let's jump right in. Starting with part 1, the reindustrialization vision. The core argument here is that a massive new ecosystem is forging ahead with wartime urgency, and energy is right at the dead center of it all. To really wrap your head around the sheer scale and speed of this proposed shift, just look at the numbers the source provides. They contrast 4 decades of relative stagnation with this sudden, explosive burst of production. According to their data, only 5 major nuclear reactors were built in the last 40 years. But right now, the claim is that there are 10 new large reactors currently under production. This massive uptick, the source argues, is being largely driven by newly created financial mechanisms, specifically calling out the Energy Dominance Finance Corporation. Now, you might be wondering, how exactly does an ecosystem like this get kickstarted? Well, the source points to a massive pivot in government strategy. Take the Pentagon's Office of Strategic Capital, for example. The claim here is that this office has essentially been transformed into a giant venture capital fund, dedicated specifically to critical technologies. This move, along with private capital firms following suit to fund manufacturing startups across the country, is presented as the absolute crucial primer for kicking off this national energy boom. That brings us to part 2, America's second atomic age. The source highlights a seriously aggressive timeline set by Executive Order 1431 back in May 2025. The challenge laid out was to bring 3 next-generation nuclear reactor designs to zero power criticality by July 4, 2026. We're talking about a timeline of under 2 years for a project that traditionally takes over a decade. It demands a complete, total break from business as usual. And here is where it gets really interesting. The source claims this crazy challenge wasn't just met, it was actually exceeded by 4 different startups. But pay close attention to who these builders are. We're not looking at legacy nuclear contractors here. Isaiah Taylor used to run an auto repair shop. Matt Lozak was a president at an HR company. Bobby Gallagher comes from a background in shipyards and logistics. It's a total shift toward non-traditional, hands-on builders taking the lead. Imagine going from running an HR firm to literally building a reactor. The emphasis is heavily on entirely new kinds of problem solvers stepping up to the plate. All right, moving on to part 3, reclaiming the physical world. This is where we see a proposed shift back to reality. The source sets up this really stark dichotomy to explain the cultural shift. On one side, it heavily critiques what it calls a past paradigm of free market worship, Harvard MBA bean counting, and this hyper-focus on software and outsourcing that supposedly lost us generations of manufacturing know-how. On the flip side is their advocated new paradigm, what the source calls mission orientation economics. This is all about tactile hardware, physical craft, and reshoring, bringing industry back home. The core argument being that real problems have to be solved in the real physical world, not just online. And to back up its critique of the past, the source brings in some pretty heavy statistics on deindustrialization. It points out that the manufacturing share of total U.S. employment fell from nearly 22% in 1979 to just around 8% today. They also use these hyper-localized examples to really drive the point home, noting that New York City dropped from having 30% of its employment in manufacturing in 1960 down to a staggering 1% today. According to the source, this massive loss of connection to the physical world is a central failure of ours that absolutely has to be reversed. Which leads us perfectly into part 4, science, the new golden age. To support its claims here, the source heavily references a White House paper with that exact title, demanding that we put humanity and hands-on craftsmanship back at the very center of economic growth. The source uses this exact quote from the paper to launch a pretty major critique of modern academia. The argument is that our education system has become totally divorced from physical reality. They argue education relies way too much on textbooks and formulas, turning out experts of academic understanding who completely lack tactile engagement with the universe. The idea of a mechanical engineering grad who has never even touched a machine tool, that's presented as the ultimate symbol of this disconnect. So, the big takeaway from the source here is that true scientific discovery does not just happen in some isolated lab during a eureka moment of invention. Instead, the claim is that the most significant economic returns and the truest discoveries actually happen on the factory floor, during the messy translation of new ideas into products that can be produced at scale. It argues that a scientist studying physics literally has to learn from the manufacturing engineer who is wrestling with production yields in the real world. To actually make this happen, the source outlines this sweeping vision to cultivate a vibrant industrial commons. They're calling for 100 Silicon Valleys spread all across the nation. The goal isn't just to have one shiny tech hub on the coast, but to rebuild industrial centers in diverse, everyday cities, specifically calling out places like Spokane, Reno, Baltimore, and Jacksonville. Think about what that would mean for your own hometown. The argument is that bringing the frontier directly to talented people right in their own backyards will unite the nation in a shared physical mission of progress. And finally, Part 5, the philosophy of potency. This is where the source ties God and industry together. Now, the source material takes a pretty unexpected turn right here. It directly asks this targeted rhetorical question: what does rebuilding our industrial ecosystems all over the country have to do with God? It's a massive conceptual leap, for sure, but it serves as a really natural bridge into the source's deeply spiritual conclusion about human capability and the entire purpose of civilization.
Their answer lies in a highly specific definition of the word potency. The source defines potency as the power to close the gap between what a human mind conceives and the actual ability to act on it in the physical world. And crucially, they insist this is distinctly separate from financial wealth. They literally say it's not about money. The core ideological claim being made here is that humans act in the image of an all-powerful God exactly when they turn mental ideas into physical reality to advance creation.
To ground this philosophy, the source leans on some major historical analogies. It argues that just like the Transcontinental Railroad or the mass deployment of electricity united the country in the past, modern manufacturing has to be deployed everywhere today. This widespread industrial infrastructure, they argue, elevates the entire nation's collective power, its potency, to do good in the universe. It's about lifting the heavy yoke of labor for absolutely everyone, from city workers all the way to rural farmers. Ultimately, the source presents a worldview where the true measure of a civilization is its capacity to build, to physically shape the universe, and to translate pure thought into tangible reality. It argues this is the absolute core of America's founding and its future. Which leaves us with a final, really provocative thought to consider from this thesis. If a nation's moral fitness and worth are truly measured by its physical potency and its tactile manufacturing capacity, what happens to the future of those who choose to focus solely on the digital world? It's a heavy question, and one the source material clearly believes it has the answer to. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and we will see you next time.